attention to this. So better, I think some of the things that I've seen from companies that are a little bit better are, if it's a legitimate email, they in fact do not put any links inside of that email. And this is actually a pretty useful thing because it forces you to go outside of the context of email and visit that website directly or call this company directly to be able to perform some actions. You might say, well, that was terribly inconvenient. Why on earth would I want to do that? This sort of brings us to the concept of phishing. And so phishing is basically the same sort of idea. It's a step away from spamming in the sense that it is still sort of a mass email out to people, but whereas spam is usually something where they're trying to sell something to you, perhaps a quasi-legitimate business that are using spammy processes to try to get business from customers. People that are using phishing are instead using it to just harvest information. So they might, for example, know that the vast majority of people in the world, or I mean, perhaps not the vast majority of people, but a lot of people that are on the internet in the world have, say, a Facebook account. And so they'll use this to their advantage. And if they have a long list of email addresses, they will send out an email to everybody, and they will say, okay, well, this email is from Facebook, and there's a problem with your account. We need you to reset your password or something like that. And what they will do is include a link to their website and allow you to change your password. And when you click on this link, it loads up a website that looks surprisingly like Facebook because they just happen to have copied their design exactly and all of the little details are exactly correct. But then as soon as you enter your username and your password, what do you think is going to happen? They get your username and password. And so now they have a little bit more information about you. Now they could perhaps use your Facebook account. Or if they are using something a bit more malicious, like a bank account website, for example, then they perhaps have your bank credentials so that they can log in and see how much money you have and perhaps go a little bit further than that. And so phishing is perhaps a very dangerous thing in terms of protecting our own privacy. And this is the reason why I mentioned before that you shouldn't use, or it's better perhaps, for companies not to include links within their emails at all. And the reason for that is that you also should get into the habit of not clicking on links in emails. Just because you are not necessarily guaranteed, even if it really looks like that email is from this company, you're not guaranteed that that email is in fact legitimate. Even if they're not asking you to do something that could be kind of sketchy, like they might not be as blatant and say, oh, we need you to change your password or something like that. They might, in fact, just ask you to log in, and that would be sufficient. If you actually click on that link and just log in, realize that something's awry after the fact, that is then sufficient for them to have your information. So rather than click on a link in an email, what's usually safest is to visit that website directly and go to that website and do whatever action that you think is necessary per the email, based on the contents of that email. And spammers and phishers have actually become quite sophisticated at this same sort of idea. In fact, there was a few years ago a phisher who wanted to get information from some customers of a particular bank called, at the time it was Bank of the West. And so they had a website, of course, Bank of the West.com. And in fact, this is the URL that the person would send out in all of the emails. They would say, click on this link, or don't even click on it, just copy this link and paste it into a browser and use that. And so a person that was well-versed in phishing, or at least is familiar with the concepts of phishing, would say, okay, actually, they're not asking me to click on a link, and even if they are, it looks to be legitimate, and so you might even copy-paste this URL. But the problem is that this URL, in fact, did not go to bankofthewest.com. What it went to was bankofthevest.com. This is two V's right here, just close enough together that it looked like to a person that was just sort of reading it through at even a somewhat decent pace, that it looked like this was in fact a W. Just by chance, with the font that it happened to use, it was close enough spaced together that it actually looked like it was a W instead of a V. And so all of these are sort of forms of social engineering, of getting you to do something that you might not otherwise do just by tricking you, just based on your own habits. Because you might be familiar with clicking on a link in an email, and that might be something that you have done in the past and you have found to be relatively safe, but realize that there are, in fact, these problems. Now, there are ways if you really need to click on a link in an email for some reason, because for whatever reason you can't type in the URL of the website directly, or perhaps it is in fact quite a lengthy URL and you just want to be sure that it is in fact safe. One of the things that many email providers or many email clients will actually do is that if there is a link like this, you can actually hover your mouse over it for just a few seconds and it will tell you what the actual link is. And we talked about this before, or have we? I'm not quite sure if we've talked about this before, but if you have a link that says something like click here, we talked about how the text might actually have embedded within it, or sort of behind the scenes, this might actually link to a website, might actually link to URL, but just by the text, you're not sure of what that URL might in fact be. And so you can hover your mouse over this link for just a few seconds, and usually a little pop-up will appear that tells you the URL that it actually is. And so you can then look at the domain, and if the domain looks legitimate, like if it's actually from the bank that it claims to be, or if it's actually from Facebook or Amazon or what have you, then you can be reasonably sure that the URL is correct. Except that you still might be prone to this sort of problem right here, where if they have a clever enough URL, they can still sort of trick you into clicking on that link. And so this is the reason why I say it's best not to click on any links at all in an email and just go directly to the website and perform your actions there. And in fact, even just going directly to the website can be dangerous as well, because what if you happen to have a typo in your URL as you type it in? So instead of going to Facebook.com, you might do something that is very common, and you replace, say, the C with a D, for example. So now it's Fadebook.com or something like that. It's just some silly, relatively trivial typo in the domain that you're entering. If somebody buys that domain and then they actually put a copy of websites or of that website's page on their own domain, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't catch the typo necessarily at first unless somehow you were able to know that you had mistyped the URL and you were able to correct it, or that you noticed that something is awry between the two websites. But most likely a good implementation of this could mean that you are going to some other person's website just through a typo and giving them information that you normally would not give them. So a number of companies, in order to battle this, are in fact buying up a whole bunch of domains. Everything, very common typos, for example, they'll buy up domains in other TLDs, so that if you go to facebook.net, for example, instead of facebook.com, they might actually own that domain as well, in addition to the .com. And they just do all of this so that when you actually visit one of these websites, perhaps by accident, they can then forward you over to the correct one. So it's in fact a good way for companies to try to secure their own users from themselves, basically save you from yourselves just through relatively simple, relatively innocuous things.